I went out to a party with a few of my friends one Friday night. It was out at a guy's place who I didn't know that well. He knew my friend Keith, but I'd hardly met him before. His parents had a farm out in the country, and I'd heard of some of the parties they had there, so I was interested. I was training for a marathon at the time, so I wasn't drinking, and that's why I offered to drive. It was Keith and 2 other friends that I was taking. When we got there, it was pretty cool. There was a fire, and everyone else had been drinking. The car I had back then was super cool. It was a 10-year-old Honda, and it ran fine. None of the guys wanted to stay that late, so we took off at around midnight. The roads we took on the way back were all narrow back roads. The party was far from the main highways, and I didn't feel like driving the long way around, so I followed the GPS through stretches of farmland and wooded areas. There weren't many streetlights, and the few houses we passed looked like they hadn't been updated in decades. The air inside the car smelled faintly of spilled beer, and my friends were in that stage where they were loud about everything, even things that weren't funny. We'd been driving for about half an hour when the gas light came on. I kept calm and said we'd have to stop somewhere to fill up. Sure enough, a few miles down, we came across a gas station with one dim light above the pumps. It looked like it might have been abandoned, but a neon sign buzzed faintly in the window, and it said open. I pulled up to the pump. "I'll get the gas," I said, and the others piled out, eager to stretch their legs. They headed inside, laughing about drunk nonsense. I stayed by the car, watching the numbers climb on the pump, while a swarm of moths circled the single light. Moths love light. I don't know why, but they do. When the tank was full, I went inside to pay. The inside of the store was small, and it was lined with shelves that looked dusty and half empty. A cooler buzzed in the corner, and one of the doors was cracked open slightly. My friends were wandering the aisles and screwing around like a bunch of clowns. The man behind the counter was middle-aged, with thinning hair and a nervous look in his eyes. He didn't smile when I handed him my card. Instead, he kept glancing toward the front windows, like he was waiting for something.
"You kids should head out now,"
he said. His voice was sharp, almost like he was scolding us.
"Pay and get on the road."
My friends muttered about how rude he was, but they didn't say anything to him directly. He rang us up in silence, his hands trembling a little. When we stepped outside, I thought maybe he was just tired or didn't like annoying customers late at night. But as soon as we reached the car, we realized something was wrong. The back tire on the driver's side was completely flat. The rubber sagged against the pavement, and the car leaned slightly to the side. My friends started swearing, blaming each other for not noticing, but I knew it had been fine when we pulled in. "Let's just go back inside and figure this out," I said. We turned, but the attendant was standing in the doorway, shaking his head firmly. He stepped outside, just far enough for the weak light above the door to catch his face.
"No,"
he said, his voice low but urgent.
"You can't stay here. Go, call someone. Don't come back in."
Then he shut the door and locked it. Everyone looked at me for answers, but I didn't know what to say. One of my friends, Matt, pulled out his phone and called his dad, who lived about 15 minutes away. His dad promised to come, but that felt like forever with the gas station man acting so weird. While we waited, the road was still empty. Even my drunk friends sobered up a little as we sat there in the dark. Then about 5 minutes later, we saw headlights. They were faint at first, a glow down the road, but they crept closer at an unnervingly slow pace. As they got nearer, we could make out the shape of an old tow truck. The grille was dented, and one of the headlights flickered every few seconds. The truck didn't pass us. It stopped behind my car and sat there, engine idling. No one got out right away. We froze, all of us standing near the flat tire, unsure what to do. Then the door creaked open, and a man climbed out. He was tall, wearing overalls, and his face was blasted by the truck's light. Before he could take more than a few steps, another man ran up from behind the store. We hadn't seen him before. He shouted something I couldn't understand, but it wasn't friendly. That was when the gas station attendant flicked the lights in the store on and off rapidly, like a signal. I finally realized he wasn't trying to be rude earlier. He'd been trying to get us gone before this happened. "Run," I said, and for once, nobody argued. We bolted toward the tree line, cutting into the woods behind the station. Branches whipped against our arms, and the ground was uneven, but none of us stopped. The sound of the tow truck's engine revved behind us. Then headlights swept across the trees like they were searching. We didn't know where we were going, but we knew we couldn't stay near the car. The woods were thick, and every step felt hard. We kept moving until the woods opened up to a wide field. We pushed through the tall grass until we reached a fence. On the other side was another road, not as narrow as the one we left, and we could see a highway sign glowing faintly down the way. By then, Matt's dad called back, asking where we were. Matt gave him the nearest marker we could see, and he said he'd meet us there. We walked along the shoulder until we finally saw his headlights. He pulled over, confused about why we weren't with the car. There was a tow truck, I explained quickly, trying to make sense of it all. And another guy. I don't know what they wanted, but it was creepy as hell. I didn't mention how the attendant tried to warn us, because even saying it out loud felt strange. His dad didn't press for details. He just told us to get in the truck, and then he drove us home. None of us talked much on the way back, and when we finally got to his house, we all crashed. The next morning, we drove back with Matt's dad to get my car, but it was gone. The pump area was empty, and even the gas station was closed up. I never saw that car again. It wasn't towed to a lot, it wasn't impounded, and it never turned up stolen. Even though I reported it, it was like it vanished. When I was in the 4th grade, my family moved and bought a farmhouse. At the time, I thought it was the biggest change we'd ever made as a family. I'd grown up in the suburbs up until then, and the most land I'd ever seen us own was a fenced-in backyard that felt cramped. The new property had fields that stretched out in all directions, a pond tucked away behind a line of trees, and a long gravel driveway that crunched under the tires every time we pulled in. The house itself was bigger than our old one. It was painted white with dark shutters, and it looked like it had been standing there for at least 100 years. It wasn't fancy, but it felt solid, and my parents both said it was exactly what they wanted. There was a barn that stood off to the side, about 50 yards from the house. It was bigger than the house, and in rough shape. The red paint had mostly peeled away, and some of the boards looked warped and loose. Still, it had a certain charm to it. My dad said he could use it for storage, and my mom thought it would be fun to clean it up, and maybe even make it into something useful. My younger sister Katie and I were just curious. We never had something like that on our property before. The day after we moved in, my dad decided it was time to see what was inside. The doors were heavy, and when he pulled them open, the hinges squealed loud enough that a bird flew out from a nearby tree. Inside, the light cut through the slats and fell across piles of junk. At first it looked like what you'd expect. There were rusted tools, an old ladder, and some buckets, but once we moved deeper in, we found things that didn't belong. There were food wrappers that looked fairly new, a half-empty pack of bottled water, and 2 rolled-up sleeping bags tucked against the back wall. There were even some hand tools laid out neatly, like someone had been working on something. My dad frowned when he saw it. Looks like someone's been living here. He crouched down and touched one of the wrappers. This isn't old. Somebody was here not that long ago. Katie asked if that meant they might still be around. My dad told her not to worry, and that we'd just clear everything out and lock the barn. Still, I could tell he didn't like what we found. He bagged up the stuff and set them by the road. He said if the people came back for them, then that was fine, but they weren't staying here anymore. My dad got a chain and a lock for the barn door and put it on. I could tell that the barn doors were flimsy, and it wouldn't be that hard to squeeze through, so I think he did it mostly for show. Maybe it made Katie feel a little better. That night, when the house was quiet and everyone was in bed, I heard noises outside. It was the sound of gravel crunching under footsteps. I sat up and listened harder, and then I heard the faint creak of the barn door. I thought about what we found earlier, and the idea that someone might still be around didn't feel so far-fetched. The next morning, my dad checked the barn. The doors were pulled slightly open again, even though he closed them the day before. Nobody was in there, but there was a faint smell of smoke. He got some boards and nails that afternoon, and by the evening, he had the doors sealed up a lot better. He made sure there was no way in, unless someone wanted to smash their way through. Katie and I stood by watching while he hammered, and my mom kept glancing towards the tree line as if she expected to see someone standing there. For a little while, that seemed to settle things. A couple of nights passed without any trouble, and I almost convinced myself that the noises I'd heard were just animals. But then it started again. The first time it was a scratching sound at the side of the house. Another night it was the crunch of footsteps across the porch. Our dog, who normally barked at the slightest sound, growled and stood by the door, with his ears pricked forward. My dad sat up with him, waiting, but by the time he opened the door, no one was there. One night, I woke up to what sounded like someone tapping lightly on the window of my room, and Katie swore she saw a shadow move by her bedroom curtain. My mom started insisting we keep every light in the house on after dark. Finally, my dad decided enough was enough. He took out his shotgun, which he hadn't used since before we moved, and cleaned it at the kitchen table. He said he wasn't planning on shooting anyone, but if someone was out there, they had to go. That night he stayed up in the living room with the shotgun next to him. At around midnight, I heard the dog growl. From upstairs, I peeked through the blinds. 2 men were outside, walking towards the porch. They weren't stumbling or anything. They looked like they knew exactly where they were going. My dad opened the door before they reached it. He pointed the shotgun towards the ground and shouted for them to leave. One of the men started to speak, but my dad raised the gun before he could finish. Both men bolted, without another word. The police came the next morning, and they searched the barn, the woods, but they didn't find anything. The officer who spoke with us said it was probably some drifters who'd been squatting there before we moved in. He said they were likely gone, now that we'd made it clear that we weren't having it. The men never came back while we were there, but after I started high school a few years later, we moved back into the city, so we were there for about 4 years in total. It was alright for the most part, but I was pretty creeped out for at least the first year of it. Even though they never came back, I was always worried about some random guys sneaking around my house at night. It was the summer before my senior year of high school. There wasn't a lot to do in my town, but I had good friends, and most nights we just drove around looking for things to do. I was with my 2 closest friends, Ryan and Matt. We'd been friends since middle school, and we'd spent enough time together that we could read each other without saying much. Ryan was the one with the car, a beat-up gray Honda Civic. We loved that car even though it was a piece of crap. It had one speaker that only worked if you banged on the door, and it broke down occasionally. Matt was quieter than Ryan, and he usually tagged along, but rarely the one suggesting things. I was somewhere in the middle, not reckless like Ryan, but not as cautious as Matt. That night, we were out on the back roads outside of town. Ryan always liked taking random turns to see where we'd end up. He said it made things more interesting, and honestly it did, though it sometimes got us lost. The area we were in was mostly farmland with long stretches of nothing. Old barns and the occasional farmhouse sat back from the road, their porch lights glowing in the distance. We drove for maybe half an hour before Ryan slowed down. He pointed at a narrow dirt road that cut off from the main one. You wouldn't notice it unless you were looking carefully. Trees crowded in on both sides, their branches hanging low, and the road itself looked like it hadn't been graded in years. Ryan grinned and asked if we wanted to see where it went. Matt immediately said no, but I told him we had nothing else to do. That was enough for Ryan to turn in. The road was rough, and the car shook over ruts and rocks. After a few minutes, it opened into a clearing, and was a big old house, with its windows boarded up. The place looked like it hadn't been lived in for decades. The grass around it was knee-high, and a rusted mailbox leaned over at the end of what had once been a driveway. Ryan parked near the front and cut the engine. We got out and poked around the car for a bit. None of us wanted to break in, and the house was locked and boarded anyway, but we walked around it, peeking into cracks in the boards where we could. The paint had long since peeled off, and the wood underneath had gone gray. The porch creaked under our weight, and the front door had 3 heavy locks across it. On the side of the house, an old metal chair was half buried in weeds, and near the back, the remnants of a shed were collapsing in on themselves. Matt kept saying we shouldn't be there, but Ryan laughed it off. I could tell Matt was serious, though, and I started to feel the same way. We didn't see any broken bottles or graffiti that kids usually left at spots like this, which made it even stranger. We'd circled the house one more time, and then Ryan said we should head back. We turned to walk back to the car, and that's when I noticed headlights coming up behind us. A truck pulled up, blocking the narrow dirt road we'd come in on. It was old, maybe a late 80s Ford, and it was lifted higher than it needed to be. The paint was faded, and the headlights glared in the dark like spotlights. The 3 of us froze for a second, and then Ryan muttered that this wasn't good. The truck stopped, and the driver's door opened. Then a man climbed out. He looked to be in his 40s. He was tall with a scruffy beard, and a ball cap pulled low. He shut the door hard and walked towards us. When he spoke, his voice was flat and direct. He told us the house was off limits, and we had no business being there. Ryan tried to explain that we were just curious, and hadn't gone inside, but the man didn't look impressed. He stopped a few feet away, arms crossed, staring at us like he was deciding something. I felt uneasy standing there with nowhere to go, but I didn't want to be the one to panic. Matt kept glancing at me, and I could tell he wanted to get in the car and leave. Then I saw something move near the tree line. At first I thought it was just my eyes adjusting, but then I caught a clear glimpse of another figure stepping out between the trees. This one was slimmer and holding something long at his side. I didn't know if it was a stick or a shotgun, but it made my stomach turn. I nudged Ryan and nodded toward the trees, and he saw too, but he didn't say anything out loud. The man in the cap finally spoke again. He said we could go, but one of us had to stay and come with him. He didn't smile, and he didn't sound like he was joking. For a second, none of us moved. Ryan asked what he meant, but the man just repeated himself, saying one of us had to come with him. I turned towards the car and said we were leaving. Matt was already halfway to the passenger door, and Ryan didn't hesitate either. We all piled into the Civic, and Ryan fired up the engine. The man stepped closer, shouting something, but Ryan slammed the car into reverse, backed up a few feet, then threw it into drive and hit the gas. The truck was still blocking the road, and for a moment it looked impossible to get past. But Ryan rammed the Civic straight into the corner of the truck's bumper. The impact jolted us hard, and the side mirror snapped off, but the Civic scraped by with just enough room to squeeze through. The engine struggled as Ryan pushed the car through a shallow ditch, and eventually back onto the dirt road. In the rearview mirror, I saw the man running toward his truck, and I thought I heard a shout behind us. But once we hit the main road, we didn't see headlights following. We drove straight back into town, none of us saying much until Ryan finally pulled over into a parking lot. We sat in the car for a while, and Matt kept saying that we needed to go to the police. Ryan agreed. I wasn't sure what they'd even do, but I didn't want to just ignore it. We drove to the station and told the officer at the desk everything that had happened. The next few days were strange. We went back to hanging out like normal, but none of us mentioned that night. I think we were all trying to act tough like it hadn't shaken us, but it had. About a week later, I was at a gas station with Matt when he ran into an older guy he knew from his neighborhood. They started talking, and somehow the subject came up. When Matt mentioned the dirt road with the abandoned house, the man's expression changed. He asked exactly which road it was, and when Matt told him, the guy said that place was known for drug activity, and that people had gone missing out that way before. He told us to stay as far from it as possible. That night, Matt called me and Ryan, and we talked about what the man said. None of us doubted it. I thought a lot about what could have happened if Ryan hadn't decided to ram the truck, or if we'd listened to the guy instead of running. We might not have come back. It wasn't something any of us said out loud, but I know we all understood it.